you very much. It is such a pleasure to be here. I did just whisper in Margaret's ear. I feel like we're the two grannies up here today.
we are.
We are the two grannies up here today. You slightly people with slightly more grandchildren, but it's... And we've known each other for quite some time, although I haven't seen you in your new role, because firstly, with working with women, which you were always very supportive and continue to be very supportive of, which is why you're here today in your busy schedule. When you were, I can't remember which particular title of all the ministries that you've held, but it was something to do with business. I suppose it was DTI, it was still called then,
we were doing women entrepreneurs.
Women entrepreneurs and encouraging women in business. And then we were judging Enterprising Britain, weren't we? We were travelling to little towns, finding where these wonderful initiatives, mostly done by women, were being held. And since then, lots have happened to you, I must say. And in the brief time we've got today, I wanted to ask you, really from the start, what incentivized and motivated you as a working mother at that point, I guess, in the 70s, to go into politics. And you've had some extraordinary experiences in politics. The job that you have now as the first woman in that role, I have never noticed this role before, put it this way. I don't know who did it in the past. I don't know what they got up to. All I can see is that you are definitely very busy. And I also want to congratulate you on all your work with the big companies and the taxation, because very interesting to see that the G8 summit has suddenly grabbed that as their little soundbite from your work. As somewhere safe to, let's have a go at the big companies, that way no one will look at what we're doing, I guess, what they're up to. Anyway, so lots to talk about. So starting off, I mean, it was in the 70s when you got involved in local politics, which is how lots of women get involved in national politics. What motivated you?
Well, to tell the true story, it is a bit funny. I've always been a Labour Party member, so I've always been active in politics. I mean, my politics started when I was 16, when I joined CND, and I used to sell the CND paper outside Foyles on a Saturday afternoon. So I've always been an activist, but I started having children, this really ages me, in 71, and I couldn't carry on my full-time job because I was doing multi-country studies for a market research company. And I just, in those days, you just didn't travel. You stayed at home with the kids. And I just loved I've got 4 children, so it's been my family is really important to me. But I got bored being at home. And this friend of mine who was in the Labour Party said to me, go on the council, it's part-time, and it'll keep you sane whilst you're changing nappies. So that was really how I started. And then politics is a sort of drug. So the more, it's very difficult. You want to change the world, and it's really difficult. There have been periods in my life when I've tried to give it up, and I always get drawn back into it again.
This is a bit of a cynical question from me. Where you are now, I can see that you are making enormous changes. Do you think generally when women, particularly when you went into it, even more so, go into politics, or men too, I guess, with the thought that I can change the world, do you think the system allows them to change the world as much as they'd like? Do you think people get disillusioned? And for women, when you were first at the House of Commons, I mean, there weren't even hardly any women's loos. I remember going back when I used to visit there.
I was told funny stories when I first became an MP, and people like Harriet Harman was in at the real start. There were hardly any women when she first went in. I think she went in about 86, 87. I went in 94, and there were more MPs whose first name was John than there were women MPs in Parliament. Absolutely terrible. And we had all sorts of, in those early days, real challenge. Do you make a difference? I mean, you go in, there are all sorts of careers and jobs that you go into that you want to make a difference, change the world a little bit, and probably a lot of you do in the jobs that you're in. So I don't think politics is special there. And I think, when I look back, there are some things that we have changed, particularly for women's position in the workplace, and I feel really proud of that. There are other issues that I thought I'd changed where it's very easy to reverse. So if I take examples of what I think as an MP we've managed to change, I think for women in particular, the right to request flexible working, I'm sure that's the most important thing for all of you who've got either caring for children or for elderly relatives at home. That right to request was probably, that and all the maternity rights that we got in were probably the most important things that we were able to achieve for women. And we're not turning the clock back on that. That's now moving forward. And that was only achieved, if I tell you a story, that was only achieved because of the women who were in key positions in Parliament in those days. There was a bunch of us women ministers who really fought for it. It was me, Harriet Harmer was really important, Patricia Hewitt was really important, Baroness Margaret J was really important, and then we had very important people sitting around Tony Blair, who was very resistant to it. He didn't want to bring in the right to request flexible working because he thought that the businesses would not like it, and of course, and it was because of the pressure of all of us, so the people in number 10, plus us ministers, and it was really everybody working together as a team, and women are much better as a working team, that achieved that. The thing I most regret, which I thought was a permanent change, was I was children's minister at one point, and we introduced all the early years, the Sure Start, nursery education, all the early years and childcare agenda, and a lot of that, I mean, I look really with terrible sadness, particularly in my own constituency in Barking, where there's a lot of need. Those children's centres are really not what they were supposed to be. The buildings may be still there, but they're a shell of, in terms of the services they delivered. And I think trying to give families and children that very best start in life, particularly those that are facing all sorts of challenges, was hugely important to me. I thought we delivered something solid, and I didn't realise it would be that easy to dismantle. And I really regret the way this government has dismantled it.
Absolutely. There's a couple of points on things you've mentioned. It's very interesting, and of course I know well your colleagues that you've mentioned, and we are talking about quite a few years ago that even then it was by women networking, being friends and sharing within the boys' club that the House of Commons still is, realistically, that you were able to put collectively your thoughts and your visions out together and then put the pressure on to make changes. Yeah. And since those days, of course, women's networks like this one and others, whether they are internal, we were just hearing about Tesco's internal women's leadership network, whether they're external, have become so prolific that it's almost like, it's like mobile phones. Was there a time when we didn't have women's networks? Was there a time when we didn't have mobile phones? Yes, and we were part of that time. Yeah. We were the pioneers. So across the House now, and across politics, do the women still network together? They still create...
Yeah. I think women's networks are really important. I was at the start of this women's network in People First, and it's great to see so many. It's fantastic. I think at the very early meetings when we all got together, it wasn't as good as that because I had ministerial responsibility for this area, and I was really pleased that People First started this women's networking group within their organisation. So this is brilliant. I think women's networks are crucial. I've always been, since the late 60s, I've always been in women's networks, and there are two things we do which I think are really important. One is we do network, and we network across, not with all women, some of them don't want to, but we network across political parties, and I think that's really important. So I will always go up to, especially now at my stage in politics, I remember one of the women on the coalition front bench, the first time she got up as a minister, to answer questions, she did it without a note. And I went up to her afterwards and said, that was fantastic. And one of the women who got sacked from the cabinet as well, it was the women on our side who went up to her and said, that wasn't fair, you were doing a good job. So I think all that is hugely important. And we do manage it. We manage it on lots of issues. And the other thing I was going to say is I now mentor a lot of the very, very talented young women who've certainly come in on as new Labour MPs and try and help them develop their confidence and help them sort of think about how they're going to manage the babies and the children and being in politics as well, and then how they're going to progress their careers. Because the men are always much more confident and push themselves forward much more, and I'm sure it's as true in your place of work as it is in ours. And so women supporting each other, and I think that mentoring is really important, and I hope you've all got mentors in your places of work as well.
It seems to me from my perception that the business world, as opposed to the political world, or the women of the business world, are very open to bringing other women up the ladder, which I would say perhaps 10 years ago even was not always the case, that there was a certain generation of women who had to work very hard to make it on their own and would say, well, I did it on my own, and maybe even 15 years ago, and that has changed. There is a sisterhood within the business community now, which goes across age and experience, which I think is extremely valuable, and it's important to know that that is in politics as well. But I do worry sometimes, I mean, we've just seen all the publicity and the movie and everything, Mrs. Thatcher, that there is still within politics a slight pressure on the women. Maybe it's still in business too, why would it be any different, I guess, that women still have to behave like men, to still have to be part of the system, to get up, and it's women that are up who are saying, actually, you don't. And very positively, there's been a lot of research now showing, certainly in business, that women are often better managers because of the qualities that women very naturally have: relationship building, empathy, connecting. I guess as starting off as an MP, that's the side for you which you would have enjoyed and understood completely.
Yeah, I mean, politics is very adversarial.
Yes.
Just think about Prime Minister's question. Everybody's shouting at each other across the chamber. I hate it. But they tell me people like it on telly. I think it's horrible, but they all think it turns people onto politics, is watching that. But I don't like it at all. And it is very confrontational. And I bet it's the same in your place. The thing that they want to talk about their drinking habits, and they want to talk about football endlessly. And one of my daughters ended up playing for the Arsenal at one point, so I'm keen on football, but my life doesn't revolve around it. So I always actually make a point of talking to the men about their children, so that they come onto our territory, or about, cooking, so they come onto our territory as well. And I think you have to challenge the conversation in the context in which you're working as well to start transforming the culture. But we are, sometimes I get quite gloomy because you think you've made progress and you haven't. And if you even look at the front benches on both sides. They're hugely male dominated still. And the other thing I would say, which I don't know whether, because I can't see you, so I can't see the audience here, but for women in politics, or women in life generally, you take a few years out when you're having your children. I've now got my children are having children, and I keep saying to them, don't worry about your career. You can take 5 years out and just coast for a bit. You don't have to take the next promotion. So I didn't become an MP till I was 50. And there is, I think that's the next little battle we're going to have, just because so you come in. My colleagues from local government went into Parliament much earlier, but I had my children and I wasn't prepared to do the hours that were involved. And so we might achieve a little later, and then you start getting this ageism, hitting you. And I think we've got to think about that and how we tackle that, because we're all going to live, hopefully everything goes along much longer. So we're going to work longer. And if you go back into work at 40, 50, or go back into wanting progression in work, I never gave up work, but there's a bit when you coast rather than trying to go up to the next phase. I think we've got to challenge them around. Just because we're a bit older doesn't mean we have got the energy, we haven't got the ideas, we haven't got the ability. And in fact, the experience of having brought up the family or looked after your elderly relative probably makes you much better than a lot of the young men that are being promoted. But I notice it now, there's a real youth thing in politics, and I'm very resistant to it. So the women, certainly in the Labour Party, older women, are now beginning a new campaign around age as well. Lynne, you'd like that, wouldn't you?
I like it. I mean, I did a talk recently, thanks to Simone from Women First, about on TED, one of those TED Talks about the return of the wise woman. Because actually, I mean, I have seen you earlier, so I know most of you are very young. And most of you, if you have families, it will be your children as opposed to your grandchildren, which we have. But there is a role, which I am very excited about the older woman. And I feel it's more than a role. I actually think it's a purpose, that it is now that we are there to teach you what we learned from our achievements and perhaps mistakes, certainly in my case, and then how we can sort of pave the road a bit for the generations to come, because there's no question about the fact that as you get older, you do get more experience and you do learn more, which brings me to something that I wanted to ask, another thing I wanted to ask you. I don't watch the Prime Minister's Question Time, I hate it, but I do watch you, and you are fearless, Margaret. I mean, you're up there asking these questions, and you go for it, girl. I mean, you really do. And I feel in a way that you've got the absolute perfect job, and also you are at the point of your life where it's, you know, if I can't be here in my integrity, in my authenticity, and do the best job I can, what the hell is it all about? That's what I read when I watch you on TV doing it. How it feels to you?
Yeah, I just think I say it as it is now.
Yes, you do.
And I haven't got a greasy pole to climb anymore.
No. It's one of the other advantages getting
But I say it as it is, and I think actually what's been great about the work we've done around tax, which I think has been, huge. You know, we've put that really on the agenda. All we can do is shine a light on things and create a public debate. And I felt really pleased actually at the G8 yesterday that it's top of the international political agenda now. And we stumbled on it. We didn't really set out to look at big corporations, but you know, there's some fantastic individuals who are brave whistleblowers, and we had a number of those come forward from Google who just said actually the form of what they say they do and the substance of what they actually do is very different. So we were able to use that evidence and just shine a light on it. And I think all of us are working hard. We all pay our taxes. And when times are hard and you're struggling to pay all your bills, it really gets your goat that these big corporations are just paying very rich accountants and very rich lawyers to create a structure, the sole purpose of which is to avoid paying a fair share of tax on the profits they make from the money they earn here in the UK. And I'm really pleased we've stimulated the debate. We haven't got a change yet, so we're going to carry on. And there is something nice about being able to be completely direct. I've just come from a training session, actually, where we've been training as a committee to get better at asking questions. And there's a bit of a dichotomy. It was a QC who was training us, and he thinks we're too aggressive. And I thought, as I came out of it, I thought, actually, all we do is say it as it is, and it may come over as aggressive, but you can tell me, I think people like politicians saying it as it is and asking the direct questions that you'd want us to ask or that you'd ask if you were in my chair.
I completely agree, and I think anyone say be less aggressive. I mean, that's what we're used to. We're used to all this smoke and mirrors and people in cahoots, and the media won't say this about this politician or this police. I mean, we don't want that anymore. I mean, that's one of the wonderful things about social media, of course, is that it is time for all secrets to go and transparent society. I think that's what women want anyway. That's my opinion. On the local level, you presumably are still very, very involved with your constituency. Again, I think when I look at what women really get their joy out of working on a local, you've had a lot of interesting challenges in your constituency because you've had the BMP there and a lot of racial activity, and yet you've won there. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you do there and your relationship with them?
I don't know if there's anybody here from Dagenham, Barking. I bet there is.
Essex? Any Essex girls here?
Can't see you all.
There's one.
One. Pardon?
She doesn't live there.
You've lived there. Well, it was very interesting. It's been a really interesting experience because I had Nick Griffin, leader of the BMP, stood against me in 2010. And what's happened is the area has changed dramatically, like the whole of London. It used to be when I first became the MP for Barking, I remember coming out of the tube station, and it was completely white. It was very unlike the rest of London, actually. It was a very close community. All of it was mainly council housing. In fact, when it was originally built, about 98% council housing. And so what you found was the council would house young people when they got married and had their couple of kids, very close to their mums and their grandmothers. And I'd never met anywhere in all my years in politics so many great-grandmothers who lived within 10 minutes of their great-grandchildren. So it was a very close community. And then with right to buy, that all changed because lots of people bought their homes and then they either sold them on, and you found sort of second, third generation migrants in the rest of London, Afro-Caribbeans coming and living there, or people bought their homes and let them, and they let them to people across, they let them to local authorities. So you'd find Tower Hamlets, Hackney, Kensington, Chelsea putting their homeless families into Barking, and therefore the society changed. And it was a really quick change, and it was meant the shops changed, your neighbours changed, the schools changed, and people find change disturbing. And we as politicians, I as the MP, have failed really to recognise that degree of unrest. And the BNP jumped in and turned it into a racist sort of agenda. And I take a lot of the blame for not jumping in early enough. But when we did recognise that, I did know people were getting sort of, we had very low turnouts at the elections in 2001. And I did a lot of work around women on an estate, and what was clear is they weren't apathetic, they were really angry. And I should have responded to that more quickly than I did. 2006, the BNP got 12 seats on the council. So I've changed how I do my politics, and interestingly enough, again, it's women. If you look across the country, there's a woman called Siobhan Madonna, who's down in Merton, who does her politics like me. There's a woman, Gisela Stewart in Birmingham, who does her politics like me. And what I do is I don't take anything from Westminster. What I tend to do is ask people to come and have a cup of tea with me, and they sit at little tables, and I get them to talk about what matters to them. And people, obviously, you think about yourselves. What are you really concerned about in your area? And it tends to be very local issues, so it'll tend to be, maybe there's a bit of prostitution down the street, a bit of antisocial behaviour, bus stop in the wrong place, the dirt in the street, the bin not at the right time. And then there are national issues like immigration or the benefit system or lack of affordable housing. And I couldn't ever really deliver on immigration or those big issues, because I wasn't in my control to do so, but I could deliver on the prostitution or the antisocial behaviour or the post box. And by listening to those issues and responding to that, you start rebuilding trust. And what had gone was the trust between me as the MP and my constituents. So everything I do now is I don't go and cut ribbons very often, but I do anything that helps me reconnect to people's concerns. So whether it's having cups of tea, I call them coffee afternoons, where I ask a lot of people to come, and not many show up, but I write to everybody and I write to them and I take up their issues, or street meetings around parking issues, or something when we actually meet on the street so we can sort out a practical way of doing it, or knocking on people's doors, not saying, will you vote Labour, but what's bugging you? All that helps you rebuild, and I think it's something really feminist about that.
Completely. I think it's
really
to say, I think I have this feeling and vision that communities are going to become much, much more powerful as we go on with perhaps not quite so much trust in national governments, etc. And it will be women's led. Again, going back to when we were going around looking at those little enterprising Britain initiatives, which were, where the women were making sure there were flowers on the streets and the women were getting beautiful shops opening in little dead high streets. I don't want to be sexist about it, but it generally was the women that were starting that. And I think we're going to see, for example, initiatives like Incredible Edibles, where up north the women are growing, women-led, it's not only women, women-led are growing the vegetables on the streets. We're seeing it everywhere. Kilburn Park Station, they do it. It's not just women. Growing vegetables on the station where the locals can come and take their vegetables. And we're going to see things more of the transition town movement. And I don't know how much of that sort of gets back to Westminster. And I wonder if there's an awareness. I'm sure you're more than aware of it, and you're very aware of grassroots. But there is an enormous amount of grassroots initiatives going on, which I think are very encouraging. Not so relevant perhaps to a lot of you here. Perhaps some of you will be, they will be further down the line. But whatever business you're in, they are going to start affecting it, particularly supermarkets and other retailers. Can you see it happening? I mean, is it happening in Barking or...
Are the women really setting up?
Yes, and are there new community initiatives? I know for a fact, because my mother's carer lives near Barking, that there are women's groups, more than women's networks, but women's groups meeting in the old libraries, in the post offices that have been closed, whether they be of a sort of certain cultural background, national background, that women's groups are just automatically coming together now every day of the week, talking about their community.
We've got to make the step from all of you coming together to us influencing what happens in either the workplace or in the society around us.
Exactly.
And there's still a struggle there.
It's up to every single person in this room, as well as looking at your careers, bringing in, and I think that's what we women do, it's the whole picture of our lives. You know, whether it's our families, our careers, community we live in, how we can contribute to make a better community and a better world. And again, I'm thinking as grandmothers, I mean, we know, because we want a world for our grandchildren and their grandchildren that's going to be better. Now, I've been incredibly selfish asking you all the things I want to ask you. We've got 5 minutes left. So I don't know if there's any mics in the room, if there's anybody that would like to ask Margaret question while she's here. There's somebody there. Is there a mic? I didn't sort of. Oh, great, brilliant.
Thank you. Are the number of local councillors women rising? Number of MPs women rising? Only 5 women allowed to attend cabinet meetings. How do we make that change?
I'm afraid I'm a believer in actually, you know, setting a quota on it. And we've in Labour have got all women's shortlists now, so you know we're getting more women MPs in. That means that in half of our seats that we know we're going to win, because you can more or less tell, not always, but you can tell, half of the seats that we know we're going to win, we're going to have women candidates. And we've done that. People hate that sort of system and say we should get up. And I think there's a sort of transitional thing that you've got to do, which is just get the women there, and then you can let go and move back. I mean, what is interesting is in the seats where we don't say it's an all-women shortlist, not one woman has got through. So where the open seats, where it could be a man or it could be a woman, not which we know we're going to win, or we think, you know, we're pretty certain we're going to win, not one woman has got through on that. So I'm afraid you need that transitional measure of actually saying we're going to have a certain number of women. And can I just say, to those people who then say you don't get good women, first of all, where are the good men? You know,
exactly.
Show me. There's a lot of mediocre men who come in. And then the second thing to say is actually the quality of the women that we're getting in, certainly in the Labour Party, these women that I'm mentoring, they're so much better than the new men we've got. On the 2010 intake from the last election, they're brilliant. There's some really fantastic, strong, bright, you know, women with passion and commitment and ability and everything. And, you know, I feel pleased that we've managed to get them in, even though it's been a route that we might not have wanted to take. So I think even within your organisations, you've got to say to your bosses, you've just got to promote women. You've just got to give, you know, women that chance. And until they change that, you'll never get it. It's shocking. It's shocking that there are so few women in the cabinet. And one of the things I regret the most, actually, was that, you won't remember it, but when we came in 97, that terrible picture of us with Blair's babes.
Yeah, Blair babies.
Oh, awful. And that was a sort of, you know, there we were just pretty like young things, you know, younger things in the so get in, make sure they create women's manager, put the pressure on, say the next one's got to be a woman's manager, and the next one, and the next one, until we're up there.
We've got time probably for one more, and then I've got one more question I want to ask. Is there anybody? Is it possible to turn this big light down, because it's very difficult to, we're supposed to sitting here like this, which as it's being filmed, it's going to look like we're on a boat or something.
Hello, Margaret. It's Brian Wisdom from People First. Thank you so much for your support for this initiative and campaign over the years. I just wonder, in your new role, which I think, you know, I'm quite thrilled to see you acting as a crusader for the taxpayer where you are now. I'm not sure that you'd always have envisaged yourself in that role. But what are the characteristics, do you think, that you have as a woman that makes you able to actually be so incisive, I think, with your questioning of those old established business civil service networks that are responsible for either not bringing in the tax revenues or for misspending public money?
Golly. I think it's this issue about being straight and not being pompous. The guy who was trying to train us this morning, who was QC, who kept saying, with respect, and, I have to ask you with, I know, which always means the opposite quite. So I'm not frightened of saying, I don't understand what you're saying. I don't know if you've ever seen that but sometimes they come back and with sort of highfalutin and complex and ridiculous sort of explanations. And I think if I can't understand it, you can't understand it, and all we're trying to do is follow the taxpayer's pound, and we should all know where our money goes, or why we don't get the money we should get in. It's as simple as that. So I think just getting rid of the pomposity and getting rid of trying to, trying just to be an ordinary person. And I think women are better at doing that than the men. I don't know quite why.
It's the confidence level we miss. So once we get our confidence, then we are definitely better at it. Well,
yeah, I think you just don't. Yeah. That's really all I bring to it. It's just a feeling that I'm you. I'm thinking, what would you ask if you were in my shoes?
Brilliant. I'm going to finish on one more question, which shouldn't be controversial, but I'm going to say, and it isn't actually, but it's about the word feminist. You wonder what I was going to say then, you look worried for a minute.
Why do I call myself a feminist?
Well, I call myself a feminist, and I think perhaps for some people in this room, maybe for lots of you, you're uncomfortable with that word because it's been so mistreated and abused by the media to represent something it isn't. For me, feminism is about creating an equal, balanced society where both genders have an equal role, not an equal role because we're different, it's different roles, but we are certainly equal. And what would you say about, I assume you were a feminist.
I'm a feminist. I've always been a feminist since the late 60s. Terrible. And I've refused to drop the term until we create equality. So until we get to a world where we're paid the same as the men, that we are promoted in an equal way to the men, that we're seen to be of equal value to the society, to the workplace, in the family, wherever it is to the men, I'm going to carry on fighting. And I think using that label of feminism, it may irritate some of the men, it does, but actually it also is a statement about where you want to get to and what you believe in. So it becomes a statement of the values of equality. And what am I in politics for? It's to create greater equality.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Margaret.